Well, welcome everybody again. So I sort of like what we did last week, where we just went around, see how everybody's doing. So you can say pass as we always do, and this will not be included in the podcast. So mine will be, but I'm not including anybody else's in there. So for your privacy and stuff. So why don't we go around? And if you're listening to this online at this particular point, say or write down what is your good and bad thing that's been going on as well too, just as a reminder of that. And always start with your bad thing first because we always end with our blessings. So there we go. So let's see. For my bad thing, it's just been really busy right now. So it's just been really, really busy. Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing for me right now is just get into everything. I just don't feel like I have enough time to do anything. So the good thing, well, everybody's shining his face being here today, and we did really good at the silent auction. I'm really excited that Hillary's teaching confirmation again tonight.
That's a good help.
It is. It's been
Blessing.
great. Exactly. We're interviewing for the custodian position tonight, so we'll see how that goes. So, I mean, there's a lot of cool things that are happening, good things that are happening. I've actually been able to write a little bit on my screenplay, which has been really nice.
That's relaxing.
It is relaxing until you forget where you're at in the screenplay. I'm like, well, I'm supposed to add a scene here, but oh well. So our church signs for today is light a candle instead of cursing the darkness. And speaking of that, one of the things I do each and every week, we'll be in Exodus, we'll be in 19, I think, 14, where are we at? 19. One of the things I do, and if you want me to send you, I send out prayer candles. I go in the sanctuary during the day and pray because that reminds me I need to pray. But then I also like candles, so if you want me to send you a picture of the candle I light, let me know. I'm actually thinking of doing a short devotional on that, so you can see all the different pictures of the candles I take during the whole year, just like a 30-day devotional that you could use. I'm thinking of doing that, so maybe that's a project I'll do in January. But so if that's something you want, though, if you need that, text me, let me know, and I'll send you a picture and pray for you. So there are some questions that can't be answered by Google. I like that one. Hipster Jesus loved you before you were cool. Is your battery drained? Jumpstart your life with Jesus. You talk the talk, but you walk the walk. And how do you say Maury? Is it Mari? Mari is not the only place to find your father, which I don't get that run.
Mari.
Did you Google it?
I did not.
They don't answer everything.
They don't answer everything. So I'll have to look at that one. That one didn't make any sense to me, so I'll have to look at that one later on.
It's all capital letters in mine?
No, it's like I want to say it's like Maury, like
Yeah.
Like a man's first
it's
name.
like a man's first name. It's not the only place to find your father. I don't know. It must be something along those lines. Well, today we are in Exodus 19. We're going to be in Exodus 19 and also Exodus 20. And I will tell you, I read one of the commentaries, and I was not very pleased with the commentary. I was actually quite upset for what they said. So we'll see if we get into that today, but I didn't. So there's two commentaries I typically use. I use Working Preacher, and then if I have a book, I end up with the book. And the book is actually Terry Fretheim, who's a Lutheran theologian. I think I had a class with him. He's a great theologian. If you ever get a chance to read Terry Fretheim, give him a ring. Him and Walter Brueggemann are two big Lutheran theologians that know that a lot of the Jewish scholars actually go to talk to because they know so much about the Old Testament. That's how much they know. And so you can't go wrong with Brueggemann or Fretheim. So, but I enjoyed really reading Fretheim's stuff today. So, and we might disagree with Luther today, too, about something. So you never know. It's going to be quite the day already, so I'm building this up. So who would like to read 19, 3 through 7?
I can do it.
Okay.
Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the people on earth, for all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel." So Moses returned from the mountain and called together the elders and the people, and told them everything the Lord had commanded him.
Okay. All right, and so then let's do Exodus 20 verses 1 through 5 first. So we'll break it up that way. Who would like to read 21 through 5?
And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me.
So 6 through 10.
But showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So that was a continuation of verse 5.
Mhm.
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you.
And then have the next person read from 11 all the way through 17.
I can do it. 4 and 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them. All rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's.
There we go. All right, so as we take a look at our text for today, is there any place you want to start off with? And as you've noticed, as we've gone through the year so far, we've talked a lot about covenants. We've talked a lot about how God promises a lot of stuff and follows through on those promises, even though people don't always get it right. And we see God doing that again in this text with the Ten Commandments. So as we read the Ten Commandments, what does your mind sort of bring you back to? How do you view the Ten Commandments?
Or confirmation or Sunday school or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What does in broader sense, what is the Ten Commandments to us? What does that fun thing that Luther always quotes? You have blank and gospel. What's the first thing that? Law. So law comes up. So we're being experienced the law today. So this is the Ten Commandments was part of the law. So what do you guys think about these? Are these the 10 suggestions? Are these? How do you see these sort of playing out in your lives, or just in your time that you're alive? You know, what does?
Well, God is always in there.
Mhm.
You know, if you don't follow him, God is a jealous God, and he's not
Yeah.
going to be happy.
Exactly.
And no matter which one it is, God is the one that.
It's a law, but it's also a guide.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
guide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard. I was talking to Pastor John over at Cross yesterday, and he referred to it as a gift. Do you see this as a gift?
Yes, because it's to help us live a better, more fruitful life if we follow these commandments.
And a happier life too. I would-
Yeah.
Because God wants what's best for us.
But you'll have people say, "Well, that ruins all my fun, though." Why would I want to do that? That ruins all my fun.
They need to look elsewhere for their fun.
I agree.
Those who consider stealing and murdering fun.
Right.
Yeah.
There are those
Similar
people
things.
today.
Yeah.
People say there's no guidebook for parenting, there's no guidebook for marriage, and yeah, there is. God gave us one.
Yeah. And this stuff too. So, so what book did we start with? So what's the first book of the Bible again?
Genesis.
Okay, so I'm gonna make. So Genesis is well known for basically what? When you think of Genesis, what's the first thing you think of? Creation. So we're not that far from the creation narrative, but yet you could say, so did God stop creating after Genesis?
No.
No. So God is still creating, and you could say this is a creation from God. This law, this way of living is a creation for the people. So I think that's an interesting way to look at this. Is God is, because I think a lot of times we think, well, God created the whole world, set it in motion, left it out in space and said, good luck, and there you go. But as we read the text, we're seeing, again, God is creating. God has not stopped creating just because it's, we're done with Genesis. God is still in that creation type of thing. And so it's stories like these that help remind us of that God is just not, create everything and set it out to let it go, but God's constantly with us. God is still creating, and God's still creating in your life and my life. So I thought that was an interesting read when I was listening to Fret Time.
And the people are brought out of Egypt to start a whole new creation of their own, a new land and
Absolutely.
new livelihoods.
And yeah, and it's hard to start as new people when you don't have any rules. Just think of when you started your families together. You had to come together to have some rules, and because when you didn't do that, how did that communication work when Wally's already laughing?
Something specific in mind?
Rules. I don't know.
Well, no, in some sense you did, because I would argue with you with that, because I think there's the rule like for our family, a rule would be like we have pizzas on Friday. Pizza is what we have on Friday. A rule then that's a pretty throwaway rule. But the other one was I cannot spend over $100 without talking to Britta first. I learned that
That's
rule.
pretty generous.
I learned that rule the hard way. So that was I wanted to get a total gym, which was $299. I bought the total gym and brought it home and set it up. And I remember one day she comes down to the basement. She goes, "What's this?" I said, "It's this total gym. It's really Chuck Norris. He's really doing this. I think I really want to get in shape, and this is gonna really be good." She says, "Well, I saw it was $300 on the charge card. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be really good. She says, were you gonna talk to me about that? I'm like, oh.
That was only the down payment.
No, that's all it was. But yeah, but I mean, it's but having that conversation, to say that, okay, so we're gonna check with each other, when we're gonna spend $100. Sort of like here at church, where a rule that we have is once it's over $500 and over, we have to check with council to make sure that's okay to do. So I mean, there's each either organization or your family, you do have rules, and you might not see them as that. A rule could be, somebody makes dinner on Thursdays. Well, that's just the way it sort of works out, but that's sort of, the rule. Or ones that you've made during your marriage in sickness and in health. And that's, you take care of your spouse in all sorts of different circumstances. And it's not easy. But that's a rule. That's an expectation we have. So, and that's sort of like I said, like what you're saying, Gene, is that the people of Israel are figuring it out. And so God said, okay, here's a structure for you. And so, and that 10 Commandments that's it, right? There's just the 10 Commandments, right? No. Okay. So what else is there?
Well, there were rules all along the way. But
Yeah.
Have you read Leviticus?
What did you say?
Have you read Leviticus?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So for everybody listening, so if you haven't read Leviticus yet, it's one of the
Yeah.
most boring books of the Bible.
Yes.
But it was their effort by the Jewish folks to sort of pin down all these different rules and stuff that they're supposed to do. What is it supposed to be? And in some sense, this is what Luther got upset with the law, was because people were more interested in what the law told them than what God was telling them. And so this is the thing that Jesus comes back for later in the day too. So when we see Jesus is always talking to the Pharisees. The Pharisees were very much into the law. They had their little law book out, and they're saying, Jesus, why are you guys doing this, or why are you doing that? Because they're like, we're following the law, which is what God gave us, as opposed to looking at it, well, what does God really want us to do? But it's black and white in here. This is what the law tells us to do. And Jesus is like, well, what is God telling you to do? And so that's, and we run into that in our own times too, right? I mean, what is the letter of the law versus what the spirit of the law is? And I think we even get that at church too. I mean, what are we supposed to do as a church? And maybe by the letter of the law, what are we not supposed to do as the church? So it's, yeah. So like I said, so that's sort of the part I disagree with Luther. So Luther would say, we have, the law convicts us. Yes, because we can't always fulfill the law, right? We sin. This is the bad things we do every time, but then we have grace to help us. But the law is not supposed to be ignored. It's supposed to, and we look at the law as, like I said, guideposts. What are those guideposts that we need to be doing? How does it help us? So the other thing out of the 10 Commandments that we get, so every time we have a covenant with God, there is sort of like a gift with the covenant. So in Noah's case, what was it? What was the sign of the covenant? What was that sign of that covenant? Rainbow. What was the sign with Abraham and Sarah? What are some of the things that you could say are the signs for Abraham and Sarah with a covenant with them? Isaac. The land being a blessing to be a blessing. So with this covenant that God is making with the people, what is the sign of this covenant? What do you think? It's actually baked into what we're supposed to do. So what do you think is the sign? You can't cut grass on it. Which is? Sabbath. So yeah, so Sabbath was sort of the gift out of this. So this idea of Sabbath became really ingrained in people because of the Ten Commandments. And so that's where we get the Sabbath. You can cut grass on Sunday. But
But what happened? I mean, that sure changed.
yeah, it did. It really did. It did and it didn't. And so the thing is, instead of it being sort of the unofficial rules or the official rules, now it's really on top of us to say, so when am I going to take Sabbath? Because that commandment hasn't gone away.
No.
But how do you honor Sabbath? Because I can tell you right now, Sunday is not my Sabbath.
No.
Sunday definitely is not my Sabbath.
Yeah.
But I'm commanded to take a Sabbath, which is typically Monday for me, where I do
Rest a day.
a rest. Absolutely. But so the Sabbath is still on, but now it's just a little harder because now you have to decide what day of the week, how are you going to honor Sabbath? So what do people do for their Sabbath day? What do you guys do?
We go to church.
You go to church? Yeah. What else do you do?
Start out the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else for you helps you have that rest day? What are some things that you do?
Well, it used to be family visiting or neighbor visiting or
Yeah.
having orange jello with bananas and
Yeah.
that's no more.
And actually, Sunday is our visiting with our California son
That's
and
when
two
you,
grandsons.
okay.
That's
Awesome.
our tradition.
Awesome. No, that's great.
So that's a family time.
So if you have a hard time sort of answering that question for you, I would ask you, what do you want your Sabbath time to be? What would be helpful for you to feel rested in God's presence? Is it going for a walk? Is it going for a drive? Is it family time? Is it open up your Bible for a little bit and reading something, or is it, working on sewing or a project or sitting on the tractor? What is your Sabbath? So so that's going to be my question for you this week. The first one is, how are you going to use your Sabbath time? So I want you to be intentional about it. I know for me, on my Mondays, I go for an hour walk. And I walk, there's a little pond next to our house, and then I just walk. There's a nice path that they have. It's a 2-mile path. So I do that twice. And they got a lot of lovely trees there. I hate the geese. But, so I try not to step on them or get run over by them.
Or step in their stuff.
Oh, I know. They're good about that. But just taking the time to not having electronic on, to have my head up, to look around, and then, it sounds dorky, but, there's a lot of other people that walk during that time. Just say, hi, how you doing? How you doing today? So, but that's what I do. So that's helps me get to that part where I can talk to God while I walk. So this week, what is your way that you're going to do Sabbath? So I will leave that with you for that. So I think right now I'm going to talk to you about what's got me mad this week.
Oh, gee.
Yes. So I was reading this one commentary, which I do not agree with. And you can. I mean, this is sort of her quote from the commentary. It says, when we are attentive to the audience and social settings as applied in the context of the Ten Commandments, we notice that the laws are not addressed to all Israelites. I don't agree. This set of laws have a specific audience, middle to upper class males who are home property owners, married and have human, animal, and other material possessions. We also observe that these laws are not concerned with liberty and or justice, but with protecting the assets of the addressed. I do not agree with that at all.
To everybody.
Yeah, it's so I mean, she's got some really interesting study questions. So some of the questions she asked are, who is being spoken to and who is not? whose interests and rights are protected, what assumptions and values are incorporated, what do these answers reveal about group and society, can we incorporate these laws into contemporary societies, and should contemporary believers abide by codes of ethics and legal codes that are exclusatory? And in our current contexts, have we created legal structures that mirror biblical ones? So yeah, typically I've always been pretty. I think I learn a lot from a lot of these particular commentaries, but I think a commentary like this really reminds me, helps me sort of put into focus how I feel about stuff. So just because I read a commentary doesn't mean I have to agree with it. Just as like you listen to me, you don't gotta agree with me, and I hope you don't, because that's. But when I read the Ten Commandments, I feel this is for the whole community. And one of the comments I will point out that I disagree strongly with this is honor your father and mother, which is really strange for a patriarchal society for God to say that commandment to, which to me is like, it's not all about upper level or middle to upper class males. It's about the whole community. And so it's stuff like that that reminds me. Plus, I think as I look at the text too, I see this as, and granted, I'm looking at it from the perspective of history. I mean, as I look at history, I think God knew that they were going to rise above this particular society that they were in. And so I think that's why these particular commandments, in some sense, are pretty timeless. I mean, there's some that are not. But like male or female slave, I hope we've worked, and unfortunately, in some areas of the world, we've not worked beyond that. But for us here, I would hope that we've worked beyond that type of language. So what do you guys think about that? Do you see this? And again, you don't have to agree with me. But how do you see this? Do you see this text as directed at particular people, or do you see it as or do you see it as a more community thing, or who do you think this?
Well, wasn't it directed to the Israelites that Moses was leading to their promised land? I mean, it wasn't in different cultures.
Right.
Isn't that right? I
Right.
mean,
So it was yeah. And let me go back to 19.
So how could it be to the upper level people that owned everything because they were all together?
They didn't own anything.
What?
Yeah. They didn't own anything, really. I mean, they
Yeah.
traveled.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, there wasn't at that particular point in time. You might have had somebody who had a couple more things than each other, but in terms of
Yeah.
wealth, I mean, there was no land wealth because they were all sort of
Yeah, they were
landless.
nomads.
So
It looks, I mean, you talk about the community. Where are the kids and people in the community going to learn if they don't start? I'm thinking back to the honor your father and your mother.
yeah.
If they don't learn to, get along at home and whatever.
Yeah.
And
It
then
carries
it
out, yeah.
gets a little bit spread out a little bit more in each one.
It all encompasses respect for one another,
Yeah.
dignity of other humans, and not just yourself.
Yeah. No,
It's relationship
absolutely.
based.
A lot of these 10 Commandments, talk to us about how we should deal with each other. And so,
What does the commentator refer to the discussion of the Sabbath day? Because that includes everybody. I mean, it's even listed, even your livestock and your sojourner, or the visitors within your gate. That's directed at everybody's.
I would imagine the argument would be that the wealthy would sort of be the ones that sort of set the rules, and so if they're the ones who set the rules, and everybody else will follow along with them because they pay everybody else to do stuff, and so if they're the ones doing that, I mean, that's sort of the argument that I'm sort of sensing from her. I'm not.
I think you should not covet your neighbor's house, you should not covet your neighbor's wife. It doesn't say wife or husband, so
right.
it's kind of singling it out there, I
Yeah.
think.
And it's interesting that you use that particular one too, because that one is also that particular commandment is actually quite different than the other commandments as well too. Because if we look at that's the only one that actually covers an attitude, which I thought was very interesting. So it's a good one that you brought up there, Sherry. But yeah, you're right. From that perspective,
Yeah,
it's
because in the slaves, it's male or female slave, but
correct.
it's like
Yeah.
the guys have.
Absolutely, it's not like, and if you have, so you women are free to.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's important that we always look at the context of the verse and stuff like that. But I argue with this commentator to say it's strictly for just middle and upper level males. For the two reasons. One, I think there's like what Don's saying too with the Sabbath. I think that is for everybody, and also for. In terms of looking at through the lens of history too, because the Ten Commandments were given to us, but God also, I think, is able to see past just this moment in time and look to the future and say, how do we, these laws aren't, because God could have really said, and you will not eat goat from this particular mountain for 5 days. I mean, if we look at the interesting thing about what the Ten Commandments are, when we think of very early laws, is they're not very specific to a time and place. They're very timeless. A lot more so than what they could have written. Yeah, you will not go up on the mountain on Thursdays without your shoes on. I mean, they could have made laws like that. The rabbis did later on, thank you, Leviticus. But when you look at what God asked the people, and the other thing too is look at how these things are framed. So the first words out of God's mouth are, I am the Lord your God. This is out of 20 chapter 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That's how God starts this discussion of the Ten Commandments. Why do you think that's important? Because they could have just said, and God spoke these words, you shall have no other gods before me. But God doesn't say that. God starts with, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery.
Well, he chose them.
Yeah.
They're his chosen people. He didn't choose the Egyptians, or he didn't choose.
And there's one God.
Yeah.
And there's one God.
Yeah.
And he
And
chose
he's
them.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other interesting thing too, as you notice about these times that we talk about this, is how God doesn't speak to these things in a vacuum. God always puts stuff in the context for us, so that there's always a story, there's always a narrative that goes along with these laws. So this is why this has happened. I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. In some sense, God is saying, I helped make you free. I'm going to tell you some other things that are going to make you free. Isn't God saying, now I own you, since I took you out of the land of Egypt.
Yeah, you do what I say.
You will do what I say. But God is, I think, as I read the text, is couching this and I've helped you have freedom. And you want more freedom. So let's give you some freedom by giving you some guideposts. Because we all know that if there's no guideposts, so if you think of sports, let's think of like football. There's a lot of rules around football. And the referees don't get them right very often. I'm just kidding. But if there was no rules in football, how do we know how many yards you'd have to run for a touchdown? Or how do we know what a pass would look like? If we had no rules, if we had complete and utter chaos in football, that would mean no rules. And we wouldn't know how to score. We wouldn't know how to do anything. It's having those guides in place to say, okay, 10 yards is a first down. You score a touchdown, 7 points. You have to go 100 yards for that. The goalpost is here. You can't, and then you would dive into minutia of Leviticus with all the different nuances in football. But you still have that guide that allows you to play the game and play the game well. I would argue the Ten Commandments are the same thing. They give you a guide to live life, and to live life well, to live life a life of freedom. So what are your thoughts on that as you look and think about the commandments and stuff like that?
I just had a thought on that. God saying that he was the Lord, the God that brought him out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. His foreknowledge, was he foreshadowing Aaron's golden calf or Jeroboam's 2 golden calves? And they both said, here's your God that brought you out of Egypt. No, it's the Lord God that brought you out of Egypt.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. That's what God starts with. You shall not make, and that's the interesting thing too. Is a lot of the gods back then had some sort of figure, but God does not want a figure. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think God does not want some type of image? Because the gods that they were praying to, they were saying was God. So that bull that they made or whatever image they wanted to say, that this is God. And in some sense, we don't have an image of God in our sanctuary.
Because we don't know what he looks like, so we even have a God.
Yeah.
One thing. We have him in our hearts.
Yeah. Yeah. We have him in our hearts.
God being spirit has no image.
Right. Right. And I think the other thing too is just think of God is, humans are really good at putting God into a box. This is who God is. This is why we like all these laws, because this is who God is. This is how we know God functions. Except God doesn't function like that. And so that reminder is one of the first commandments, is to say, you can't put me in a box. What you imagine me to be is I'm more exciting than what you could ever imagine. So,
Of course, God created us in his image.
that's true. That's very true. And then the hard part is we don't know what we're created in God's image, but was that his thumbnail? Is that his which image was the God using? So, all right. So, any other questions about this? Because we're getting close to the end for today.
It makes me think of all the, God made us a free spirit also, and the choices that he's put out there for us. If you abide by all those choices, you're going to be all right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so that's a good plug for our adult forum that we're going to have in a couple weeks on predestination, to say whether we're predestined for stuff or we're not. So hopefully we won't divide the church, because that's one's a big division issue within the church for a long time. So, but yeah, any other thoughts? Where are we going to be at next week? Are we still in Exodus, or are we
I'm guessing Joshua.
Joshua? Okay.
From 2018.
From 2018.
From 2018.
I think
And
you're
it's
right on
going
that.
right along with us.
Well, that's good. You can see they use the same one. So
We're stable.
yeah. So we're in Joshua next week.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So let me end this here real quick. So thank you all for listening to the podcast. At this time, we'd ask you to take some time and pray, as we will be praying as well too. If you have any prayer concerns, please either reach out to me or the office, or leave them in the comment section below. If you have any questions about the Bible study, please also leave them below. We will see you next week.